Welcome back to Raising the Glass, the Tipple. This is the sister podcast to our main podcast. Think of it as a little short on the side. Or for this episode, the podcast. I am joined by Greg Morley, author of the book Bond, and somebody with decades of experience in HR. Greg has been an advocate, an ally, and an avid supporter from the beginning of Raising the Glass. And in his own work, through the research for his books, he's gathered lots of stories, lots of insight, and has generously agreed to share it with us. Spoiler alert, Greg will be joining us on the main Raising the Glass podcast, but we thought that we had to make sure that we shared some of his learnings more quickly with the Raising the Glass community. I'm also going to say that every time Greg and I sit down together, I genuinely feel like my cup is filled up. So I'm really excited on a personal level for today and for everybody else to experience some of that. And also I normally finish a session with Greg saying, I just wish I'd hit record on that. So with very little structure and just a bit of us sharing our thoughts, hopefully you'll get some brilliant learnings. Before we hit record, I said to Greg, what sort of themes do we think that might come up? And Greg, you had a few reflections from some of the work you've done on what listeners will get from this session today.
First of all, thank you for including me in a conversation with you, which is always a pleasure. And I, too, always leave with a full cup, wishing my cup were larger so I could fill more of it up. I'm just so proud of the work that you do and the impact that you have on individuals and organizations. And I was reflecting a bit on that this summer as well. We were talking about being in the moment and being present, but also appreciating what we have and trying to see the world around me and notice the impact that I make as an individual on other people, and appreciating that. Because I think sometimes we're in such a journey, we're always trying to move forward to do the next thing, check something off, do the next thing. And I think if one thing we can all start now, this next season of life after we all come back from our winter or summer holidays, wherever we are in the world, is to have a little bit more appreciation for the impact that we all have on other people, whether that's one person, whether that's 1,000 people, whether that's 1 million people. And I think that can re-energize us for the work and the journey and the difficulties that will come through work, through family, through health, through all the things that come at life. So it's a real pleasure to be back with you. And I just couldn't be any more supportive of the work that you do and the impact that you're making.
Thank you. We'll get a little bit, I think, into some of your storytelling that you've gathered as you've gone. And for anybody who hasn't read your book yet, Bond by Greg Morley is, as it says, it's about bonds and how important those connections and I suppose the community, which resonates really well with what we're trying to do. Before we talk about that, though, I just want to pick up on a really interesting point that you talked there about the impact. Yeah. And I think most of us, with a degree of emotional intelligence, we do go through our lives considering the impact we have on others most of the time. But you framed it at the beginning then the other way round. And I'm wondering, in those reflective moments you talked about, what's the power of not necessarily considering the impact that others have on us all of the time, but I suppose our own impact on ourselves?
Yeah, there's the point of, I think, being reflective from time to time is really critical in terms of restoring ourselves, but also kind of getting back into the fight. And a lot of the topics that we talk about together and we've talked about with others, they take some grit and they take some thoughtfulness and they take some energy. And it's not a straight, progress is not a straight line. And so I do think we have to reflect on ourselves to be ready for the next battle, the next victory, the next championship, whatever that is in life. And to be also careful about how we approach the next steps. I had a discussion with a woman who I used to work with, who works for a very large wines and spirits company. And I've known this woman for many years. I worked with her in Asia. She's come now to France. And she's a very, very dynamic, intelligent, just beautiful soul. And she is interviewing this week, or interviewed yesterday, for a dream job. The job sort of she came to, picked up her family and moved to the other side of the world. And it turns out that at the same time, she's blessed with being pregnant. So she and her husband are starting a family. So she's in this sort of dilemma about, I'm going to interview for this job, but I understand they really need somebody right away. And what I was saying to her is, like, be thoughtful about that, interview. Obviously she's very career minded. She's going to go for it. But I said, if they want to make a decision about when and where, let them make that decision. Don't you be the person, who has to tee up excuses for them. And I think that's part of, being reflective about when we go into some of these conversations with others, where we're trying to represent ourselves or represent others, to do it in a way that's thoughtful and best represents, us in those conversations.
It's sad, though, that still in 2025, people who are starting families, however that happens, still have this balance of what will the impact be of me telling somebody I might be bringing a child into my family in whatever way. And I've had those experiences myself. I've been the person that's gone through an interview process. And actually, my advice for anybody listening is, if they don't want to take you because the short-term view is you might be out for a period of time, then it's possibly not the right culture for you. My experience, for me personally, was really, really positive. It was one of, congratulations, can't wait for you to start, and we'll see you when you come back from parental leave. And the loyalty that drove in me to that organization, to those individuals, and that was 15 years ago, still stands by me today. It's one of my building blocks. It's that moment when I can anchor back to when I did feel that equity. Yeah.
And you can be re-energized by that moment even today, probably. I'm hopeful that this conversation that was to take place this week will end in a positive way. I believe that the culture of that organization will be supportive, because I saw it happen before with very senior people in similar types of jobs. As you said, the organization has the long view. The key is not the now. The key is the talent. You have the best talent. And, we talked about this when we were together at Dash Water. I mean, you could just tell it's an organization that's full of talent. It's drawn to people are drawn there because of the culture. They stay there because of the culture and the leaders. And that's the kind of those little, maybe micro decisions that happen along the way, which could be a promotion for this woman, and honoring of her family situation. That's the kind of thing that sends a message to the whole culture. And so then I think if we get back to your question, because I got us sidetracked on that story, which is always my problem. What have I been picking up? Sort of, I wrote Bond about, it was a process that took a couple of years. I published it last summer, and I've been speaking about it and talking to people about it, and certainly reflecting on how people absorb it, which is really fascinating to me. And even hearing from people who know me who say, why didn't you include this story or that story? And so I thought, okay, maybe that's for the next book. So I've been researching and working on a second book, and it's helped, I think, in a way to clarify even some of the things that appeared in Bond. And for sure, one of the things that is becoming more and more clear to me is the strength of connection and community, in terms of one's career, one's success over a long period of time, one's ability to recover from situations. It's just really very critical. And you hear it time and time again through people's stories. You see it in data. We even see it now in terms of, it's one of the keys to people having long qualities of life when they're much older, is that they have strong community, they have strong networks. And if you backdate that to the original part of somebody's career, I was just talking with a son. He's the son of a guy I worked for at Hasbro. And he said, can you give him some advice? He's about ready to go into university. I said, sure. And I said to him, start your network building now, because it's like an investment strategy. You put a few things in the bank now, You may not need it for 25 years, but when you want to go back to it, it's going to be, a flourishing garden. So nourish that along the way. And I think, through ambitions like Raise the Glass, you do that. You build community, people meet each other, they make connections, they learn from each other. And so in a way, you're planting those seeds as well for others.
I think that's why the mentoring platform's so important, because I do think, particularly when you're first in your career, people talk about mentoring and sometimes it can be this big scary thing. And then I'm a huge fan of actually, whenever there's a mentoring partnership, it goes both ways. And I know, again, a lot of people within the Raising the Glass mentoring platform would say, Lee Jones posted something on LinkedIn, he learns something every time. And I do think sometimes you need that framework. So I think you're right, how do you nurture it and nourish it and plant the seeds and water them? But how do you help somebody maybe fertilize it a bit more quickly or educate them on how they're doing that? I think I can go here with you because we have had similar conversations in the past, but with the backdrop of everything that we're seeing in the news, in the media, how important now is that human connection? Are those bonds?
Yeah, absolutely critical. There's so much that we read or see or scroll that is a kind of an aggregate of negative emotion, wherever it's coming from. And oftentimes, my experience is when you start to talk to people on an individual level, most people don't live in that sort of very negative, sort of screechy world. They live in a world where we're talking about our summer holidays, we're sharing the fun things that we did with family, or we're sharing some things that we're dealing with at work. It's the day-to-day of life. We're not thinking in those ways. So my message when I wrote the book of Bond, when I wrote the Bond book, was really to say, get back to talking to people as individuals. If I think about it from a company perspective, if I'm running a company, I want the best people in the company, and I want them to feel recognized, empowered, and I want them to be productive. That's business owner way of making a business work well. So how do I do that? Like, I have to have a personal connection with those people. I want the people that I work with to have a personal connection with each other, to know each other, and to work in an environment that's positive and developmental. And so I think a lot of what we see in the world, there's a lot of pressure. It's different pressure than maybe it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but it's just this chapter of pressure. And probably in 5 years, there'll be some other pressure, some aggregate pressure that we have to deal with. Hopefully, as we are, sort of down here, a little bit below the clouds, continuing to have conversations like this, continuing to support efforts like Raise the Glass, then, progress continues to be made. And those companies, like we've experienced together, who build great cultures, who create areas where people can develop and be recognized, those companies are going to continue to do well. Throughout all of this, you see, I just saw in the news today, like, company X, brand X has decided to defund their initiatives around employee resource groups and everything. The trigger in that company is going to be the good people will start looking to go to other good companies. Now, some people will stay in the company because they have to. I mean, it's a tragedy for that company. More, it's a tragedy for the people in that company. But, talent will be attracted to great companies and great cultures and places where they're recognized and they can be their best and be the individuals they are. And so that's what I try to advise business leaders, managers, people who are looking for jobs. Focus on that, because that constant will exist. This political aggregate, sometimes nonsense, will come and it will go.
Yeah. And I think it is really easy to say, if you're in one of those organizations, go and find another job. And I think you've talked very sensitively there about not everybody can, or not everybody can do that straight away. And that's why initiatives like Raising the Glass exist. If you are in a company where you are seeing people rolling back on those DE&I commitments or employee resource groups, then what is there externally that you can lean into that can support you whilst you may be making longer term decisions about your career? We like to talk in letters and threes and things like that because it helps our brains remember things. And we've talked about, I suppose, community and connection. But I think both of those lend themselves to a third C of conversation. I think that's what you were just talking about. We don't live in this, I love the term that you use, such a Greg term, screechy world. I'm going to adopt that. We don't live in this screechy world. We view it, we scroll through it. But when you're having a conversation with somebody, if somebody's got a slightly different viewpoint, as human beings, we'll often have a conversation about it. When the algorithms are algorithming, and I'm the first to say there's definitely some algorithms hitting some of my social media posts at the moment, so please share them far and wide. I always encourage people, and one of my top tips is, if you are a firm believer in XYZ, go and find the people who are talking around the opposite viewpoint. Get that into your algorithms, because that's actually how you see. It's not that you're supporting it, but it's how you see how some of the narratives are being shared. And therefore, it helps you create a culture and a community and connectivity that is rooted more in more real-time outcomes of some of those narratives that we're seeing at the minute.
Yeah, and it's an absolutely proven strategy, what you're talking about. And it's the essence of diversity. So why do organizations that are diverse, and however an organization defines that, why do they do better? And they do better. So you can take the data and you can find plenty of data that says diverse organizations, usually that have representation diversity and also cognitive diversity. So people that come from different backgrounds. And so for, again, business leaders, it's imperative that if I have an idea, I go out and I find people who challenge the idea. Now, that sounds great, except if the culture of my organization does not encourage people to speak up, it doesn't give people license to be wrong, and it doesn't give underrepresented people or people that don't necessarily have a voice, a platform to do that, then I'm never going to hear all of those great ideas. And it's the other sort of unexplained benefit of diversity is the companies who are more diverse have less risk. Why do they have less risk? Because I might have an idea and I think, you know what, Rebecca, I know she's not a proponent of that. So let me go have a coffee with her. So you're probably going to we may not end up agreeing, but you may open my mind to think something like, oh, I should be mindful of that when we move this thing forward. And I'm going to check back in with you later and say, okay, we're going to move forward, but can you just kind of keep an eye on? That's how companies stay out of trouble also, because people in the organization are kind of buffeting each other. And it gets back to this point of conversation. Again, what my point in Bond was, let's all kind of come to the middle and not be so afraid to disagree with each other, which frankly, in the current environment, it seems like we're absolutely terrified to disagree with people because we're afraid of where that might lead. And if I could tell you another quick story. So this is a London cab story. So I was in the UK. I was in London, maybe this is 6 or 8 months ago. And I have a friend, I used to live in Hong Kong. He now lives in Islington, and I was in the city. So I was running late, so I decided to get a taxi. I get in the taxi, I look at the map, it's like 27 minutes or something in the taxi. And we start chatting, the taxi driver and I, he's a really kind of chatty guy. And he almost immediately gets into this discussion of names and how you call people and pronouns. I think there was something on the radio. I don't know what triggered it anyways. And my first reaction, which I guess is human reaction, was to like, oh my gosh, it's like 26 and a half minutes now. You know, like how long am I going to have to listen to this guy? And so I thought, well, practice what you preach. I should try to understand his point of view. And so I said, where do you get that? And he said, oh, I listen to a lot of radio when I'm in a taxi and they're talking a lot about this. And I said, we started the discussion about names, and are names really that important? And so I asked him what his name was, and he said his name was Robert. And I said, it's okay, I'll call you Bob. That's easier for me to remember. And he said, well, no, my name's Robert. And so we got into discussion. So that was kind of a way for him to say, okay, I kind of understand, like, people want to be called what they want to be called. Anyway, he then says, oh, this place, Islington, there used to be, it's a lot of lefties live there now. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, it's never ending. It's 25 minutes in a taxi. And so we kept chatting, and then we got off of the political makeup of Islington, and we started to talk about he likes cars and his wife and everything else. I was telling him about him and my husband and our life. And, we were just having a sort of generally nice conversation. I was learning something from him. I think maybe he was learning something from me. And we got towards the drop off, and he says, do you mind if I turn the meter off? I want to show you something. He said, it's right around the corner, the restaurant. I said, yeah, sure. So he drives down the street and he points to a door and he says, that's the house I was born in. And I thought, wow. So just through that, we made a connection where he was willing to show me that. And I was just really touched by that. But I learned something from him. He learned something from me, I think. I don't think I don't think he's going to go vote differently next time. But at least we came to some middle ground, and we weren't sort of completely disconnected because I heard something that I was, a little bit put me off. And he didn't shut me down either. And I think that's the beauty of listening and having conversation with people, even if it's about potentially things that we find uncomfortable.
I think that there's this phrase, when you're not, and probably more in the business world, but you were talking to it a little bit before around, if you want to do something, somebody might not agree, and you take them out for coffee. And I've used it a lot in my career, that how do you get to the point where you disagree and commit? So let's all have the conversation, let's work it through, but whatever we take out of the room, whatever we get to and align on, you all stand shoulder to shoulder. And I am genuinely a huge fan of that in a business sense. That, broadly, if you've got agreement, that's the way forward. But I think perhaps we need to rephrase it. I think maybe this is not about disagreeing and committing. You have to have some degree of being comfortable. If it's something that's so far out of your value system, how can you ask somebody to commit to it? Okay. But in both of those examples, I think there's something about disagree and connect. I don't have to, I can stress test what you're saying. I can say, these are the reasons, Greg, why actually I'm not too sure. Help me overcome it so that I can disagree and connect. Because if I can connect with some element of it and feel that it's the right thing to do, which might be a different value system lever to how you're seeing it, and actually maybe you get exactly what you've described in that taxi journey, you're not going to change somebody 100%, but you're going to connect enough to maybe have a bigger conversation and maybe change something a bit more impactfully.
And it's you've been very successful in your world, in a commercial world. In a commercial world, you have to understand the other side, right? You have to kind of work your way into that. And that's the way the commercial world works. That's the way people become successful salespeople, and that's how they grow businesses. And it also, if I go back to that story, it allowed me to be reflective of my own approach, or how did I open the conversation, and even to give myself credit for having the conversation, especially when at the first moment, like I said, it's like, oh my gosh, 27 minutes of this. And, I did like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to get off my platform for a moment and understand somebody's perspective, which can help me, be better at what I do and to help other people, which is what the book is all about.
So we talked a bit around, I suppose, bond. We talked a bit around the connections, the community. From all the women you've spoken to, all the men that you've spoken to, every single person that you've spoken to, through the research for the book, but probably a little bit through your career as well, what's the biggest learning where you've gone, oh, maybe you knew it, but you needed to hear it? Or what's that bit that was the game changer?
I will never forget someone who worked for me who was and is an extremely talented person. And I, by nature, I'm very much a sort of a developmental leader. I'm always trying to develop people. I have a sort of a sense of my space is not permanent. I have a role, whether that's head of HR for Asia Pacific or head of HR for a theme park in China or whatever the job was, that I'm not, there's no king or queen in the role. Like, you're there for a period of time and somebody else is going to come. So I'm always mindful of trying to develop people into that role. And I was talking with this woman who worked for me, and she said to me, you have to let us fail or succeed at some point. And it was a startling comment to me, because my intention was always to allow people to succeed, but never actually to let them fail. And if I look back on my own career, the failures are the things that, catapulted me to the next thing. Wow. And so, and it was striking because I believe that I was trying to do the best, especially for the women in my organization. But what I was actually doing was protecting them from the reality often of their success or failure in the organization. And everybody needs to go through that to have those opportunities. And so I think what I learned in that one interaction, which then I started to diagnose all the other ones that I had, was I was protecting sometimes the women in my organization more than I should have. And it wasn't fair to them, because it wasn't allowing them to thrive as well as they could. And so it was a good kick in the boot for me to think of my team members more as partners than subordinates. And it was something that helped me, I think, certainly later in my leadership journey, to be more successful with all of the team members that I worked with.
And I think when things like that come from such a positive place as well, of course you're trying to protect them, because that's it, again, it's sort of in our DNA, isn't it, to protect people and to your point, that development bit, help them be the best version of themselves. You just need to go that extra mile and give them that growth space. And sometimes we all need to feel that little bit of with the right support network, but not a support network that means they're not growing into their full potential.
Yeah, and I suppose it's somehow like parenting too. You have to let your kids skin their knees.
You have to let them fall
out of the tree, and do that kind of thing. And I think it allowed me also to even more understand my space as a leader, as a space which is a kind of caretaker, role. Of course, you have objectives. You have to get things done. You're going to be held accountable. You're going to be reviewed every year, all this kind of stuff. But it's very transitory. And if I look, now that I'm several years out of my last large corporate role, and I look back on it, I mean, it feels very transitory. And as I start to see the people who worked for me on teams be in the roles I was in and be even more senior than that, it's really humbling, because you realize, okay, I had something to do with that, but how could they have maybe been further, faster had I done certain things? So it's a real period of certainly at this point in whatever my career is as an author and more of a speaker, to reflect on that and how we impact other people.
Which is a lovely way of, as we're kind of going towards the close, of bringing it right back around to where we started with that impact. I think by now most people will have probably picked up on some of your impact, that you are very humble. You're taxi story of, I learned lots. Hopefully he learned something from me. Your story there of, all these people that have gone on to do these amazing things in their career and playing a small part of it, which I think, credit where it's due, is probably a much bigger part than you would yourself say.
Thank you.
I think that bit around letting people learn. My example is the shoelace story. So for anybody who has had a toddler learning to tie their own shoelaces, it takes time, and it's sometimes you want to keep them in Velcro shoes. Sometimes you want to tie their shoelaces for them. But every time you do that, you're taking away the opportunity for somebody to learn. And it's so much easier sometimes to protect people or just do stuff. And I love that bit of, there's no king or queen here. There's a moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, as a leader, the best leaders that I know are making sure that they're developing people to be better than them, because that is how the company goes, whether it's a small challenger brand or a big, huge multinational. Yeah. It's the people that drive the business forward.
And building on that, when I look back at whether it's my career or others' careers, we don't sit around having a glass of wine talking about, wow, that was a big year. We really made the number that year. Or, that was a flawlessly executed restructuring. We don't. We talk about the people, the moments, where the people are now. I still have a very close relationship with my former boss from Asia, who's now back in France. And when we talk about, the things that were meaningful, that last, and the people who have benefited from those moments. And so I think as leaders, it's important for us to impart what we know and have experienced, to do the right things for the business, which we have to do because sustainable businesses allow us to do good things for great people. They allow us to support the community, allow us to support things like Raise the Glass. So being successful in the business is important, but we don't do it without the people. And the people are what are the legacy and will be the thing that you'll be talking about in 5 or 10 years. It won't be, the promotion you sold through at a certain company.
And I think you brought that to life for me very early on in our conversations when Raising the Glass was new. I mean, it's still only a year old, but when it was really new.
It's hard to believe it's only a year old, I have to say.
Yeah.
Really hard to believe.
It's, the sleepless nights and the wrinkles would say differently. And I think I was probably having not a crisis of confidence, because I'm really privileged to do what I do. And you talk about legacy, and I think I said to you at the time, I hope this is around as long as it needs to be around, but I sort of hope it doesn't need to be around for long. But I am super proud. As I've always said, it's about the community. It's not about me. It is the community. There's just something very special in Raising the Glass.
Yeah.
And I said to you in a bit of a throwaway comment of, I'm not trying to change the world. And then, because you are you and had already probably read my very open INFJ signals, and I probably was trying to change the world. You used a phrase with me, which I've actually talked about on the main podcast before. So it's really good that people can kind of put your name and your voice to the quote, which was, but if you've changed one person's world, then that's changing a world. And I still stand by that today. And that for me has been such a grounding comment. I think sometimes we measure success or we measure impact by huge statements, by legacy, but actually you talked at the beginning about those moments of reflection. That one person that says, I just listened to this podcast episode and it just changed my thinking, or actually I want to stay in the drinks industry now because I found this community of like-minded people. You in that moment helped change my mindset and my world, because this is just about changing one person's world, one moment at a time. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind. And that means the world to me, because that really, I feel like, is my mission in life, to be able to help other people see more in themselves than they do at the moment. And so that you sustain me for many weeks on feedback like that.
Good. So it's only probably fair to say, as we've probably filled each other's cup up a little bit again, which I absolutely love these sessions. If anybody wants to find out a little bit more about Bond or as you as a speaker, how can they get in contact with you?
So very easy. You can find me on LinkedIn. I love to be active on LinkedIn. I love to peer into other people's worlds through LinkedIn. And I also have a website, which is gregmorley.com. So quite easy. And you can find more about me there. I love to speak on these topics, but more than that, I love to engage on these topics. So nothing fills my cup up more than a discussion like this. Coming into a company or an organization and having those discussions like we had at Dashwater months ago, that's just a great moment for individuals and for companies to continue the discussion around topics, especially in the current environment where we do need to lift each other up and we need a certain amount of get into the huddle and get into the locker room and let's get back together and let's get back out there. And I think Raise the Glass does that. And it's a great tribute to the industry.
Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure, as I knew it would be. Thank you ever so much for joining me today.
Thank you for giving me an excuse to come back from vacation. This was great.
Ditto. Greg, thank you very much. That is us all wrapped up. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, don't forget to like, subscribe. It makes all the difference, and share, because you can play a part in making sure that you change somebody's world.